Whoa, hey guys, it has been a while since I've made a video. Oof. Well, if I'm gonna make a comeback, maybe it's a good idea to get back to my bread and butter. So, it's been a few years since I've made a video commenting about how video games are reported on in the media and how all these different politicians and media figures try to blame shootings and pretty much any kind of negative thing you can imagine on video games. So I wonder how things have been. I mean, it's been years. I'm sure people have gotten a lot smarter by now, right?
We celebrate death through video games that literally reward you with extra points for going back and finishing people off. I mean, it is horrific and it is graphic, increasingly realistic. The television shows that now are even on primetime, movies, again, these are things that have long existed, but the degree of specificity, the graphic nature of them, the encouraging of people to participate in the form of video games, and then the belief that none of this is connected to what we're seeing, give me a break.
Oh, come on. That would be Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin doing his, well, supposedly doing his best to explain a recent mass shooting in Florida at a high school, and the phenomenon of mass shootings in general. So it seems safe to assume that there are still, even after all these years, still a ton of people peddling this idea that video games are somehow to blame for all of this violence. But he goes further and adds in television shows and movies, and earlier in this clip he actually even blamed music. So it seems like he's just one step away from reviving the 1980s satanic panic when people thought that rock and roll was going to lead to all of our kids worshiping the devil. But anyway, as to what he actually said, the only video game I can think of that has any mechanic at all, let alone a reward, but any mechanic at all for finishing off wounded enemies would be Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. And in that game, you're actually penalized for finishing off wounded enemies. So, unsurprisingly, he's just making stuff up, and then he's talking about bonus points and score. I mean, like so many of these people, and if you've seen my old Fox News commentaries, you know this, so many of them have this 80s, maybe 90s mindset, where video games are all about high score. They have not seen or heard of the last 20 to 30 years of video game development. Let's see what else he's got to say.
We've removed any responsibility from the homes and from communities, from schools and from churches, from things that once were the background and the foundation of the mores of a nation. We've told these people to keep a lid on it, keep that in your own mind.
Okay, I legit don't really understand most of what that man just said. But from what I could gather, my takeaway is that he really has no idea what it is that he's trying to say, or what it is that he's trying to blame this violence on. But let's go ahead and point out right now that all over the world they have these same video games, for the most part the same music, the same TV shows and movies for the most part, and nowhere else has this issue. So whatever the solution has to be, it must be something unique to the United States, because this doesn't happen anywhere else. And then with mention of church, I think he's trying to put forth this idea that somehow you're not allowed to be openly Christian or something like that. It sounds like it's maybe getting into some conspiracy theory level stuff, but I'm not even sure because he was so sloppy about how he said it.
So we've removed any sense of right or wrong. We've infused that with a whole lot of do whatever, including taking human life, and then we're shocked when people do it.
You know, this is actually a much more informative talk than I expected it to be. You know, I didn't remember when Obama came out and said that there's no longer right or wrong and that we could just murder people. You know, I must have missed that speech. Okay, but seriously, this is again borderline conspiracy theory level thinking here. The last time I checked, we are a country that still has laws. You still go to jail if you kill someone, if you murder somebody. This idea that there's no right and wrong is just absurd.
We gotta grow up here in America. We gotta be serious.
Okay, I mean, I agree, but given the talking points you've just made, I really don't think you're the one who should be delivering this message.
This is a cultural problem, and in America, at every level, from the homes that we live in to the White House and everywhere in between, we need to have a frank and honest dialogue about the cultural reasons for young people killing young people.
All of that is exactly right. You know, we do need to really have this cultural conversation at every level of our society. But that doesn't mean that any random idea you can come up with contributes to the conversation. You know, that doesn't justify just pretending that it's everything you can possibly imagine in the media that's to blame for this. We still need to have serious conversation. We need serious explanations. And, you know, personally, I think one of the things that we should all be discussing is why is it that so many young men, especially, feel like the only thing they can do is turn to violence. They feel like they can't reach out or they can't get help. And I think that's a really complex, deep question. At least in some cases, they may have genuinely tried to reach out for help and didn't get it. Some of them might have felt like they couldn't reach out to get help because, well, that was their experience. They honestly really couldn't. So there's some structural issues here as well. But of course, you know, screw that conversation being serious. It's TV shows and video games. That's all, guys. Come on. It's simple.
It's not the gun, because they could just as easily run kids over while they're waiting in line to get on a school bus.
Maybe, but they don't, do they? Now, I'm going to maintain my traditional stance on this channel of trying to be pretty apolitical, and I don't come down particularly hard on one side or the other of the gun control debate. I'm in between. But if we're going to be honest here, yeah, of course the gun isn't the root cause, but there is a reason they use guns as opposed to other means. It'd be foolish to deny that.
What is the mindset that's causing young people to kill other young people? That's what needs to be addressed.
Is there any evidence that drawing the connection to video games and movies and this behavior?
I love how he just shakes his head and throws up his hands there like, oh, what? Evidence? Pfft, who needs that? Come on, man. Just go along with the narrative. Stop questioning things.
Again, go back before any of these existed. How many children walked into schools and slaughtered other children? How much more evidence do you need?
The answer to that would be any evidence. I mean, this guy just sat here and unironically made an argument that correlation equals causation. You know, a lot of other things have changed between 50 years ago or 30 years ago and today. It's not like everything was held constant, except for video games and the media. A lot of other stuff has changed too.
You have 17 more dead children in Florida. We had a couple dead children a few weeks ago here in Kentucky. How much more evidence do people want? The people who say there's no evidence are full of crap, frankly, and are using that as an excuse to not address the fact that we have plenty of dead bodies of our children that are the evidence.
God, what a slimy, disgusting, manipulative answer. I don't think I need to explain too much about why what he just said there was illogical and a despicable use of dead children for political gain, literally. The dead children are not the evidence that there's a link between video games and violence. They're evidence that something bad is going on, yes, but they're not evidence to support your specific explanation. That is basic logic, and he knows it. That is just a politician being incredibly disgusting in order to change the subject so he doesn't have to answer a very fair and straightforward question that he just does not have a good answer to.
I don't know how much more anybody needs.
What should the government do about this, if anything?
Again, let's start a dialogue. The most important thing, back to the beginning of your question, not to have any knee-jerk response. The idea that we need to do this or to do that, this rule or that law, that is not the answer. And mistakes are made when people, with good intention, in moments of emotion, rush to judgment. Let's start an honest conversation about what is or is not appropriate to be infusing into our young people.
So that was just a lot of platitudinous hot air, no specifics, no actual solutions or potential solutions given. Just another way of avoiding having to actually answer a specific question. And honestly, we've been having this conversation in America for over 20 years now. It's not like we've never tried talking about it before.
And I'm a big believer in the Constitution and the First Amendment and the right to free speech. But there are certain things that are so graphic as it relates to violence, and things that are so pornographic as well on a whole nother front, that we allow to pass under the guise of free speech, which arguably are.
I'm a big believer in the Constitution and the First Amendment, except for when people do things that offend me. Yeah, okay, we got it, Governor. So he's in favor of banning things that are apparently violent or pornographic, which he says are arguably for freedom of speech. It's not arguable. They are free speech. All right, just because they're violent or pornographic or offend your sensibilities doesn't mean that they're somehow not free speech. If that is your opinion, that they can be banned if you personally think they're too violent, then you're not in favor of free speech. You are in favor of your standards being used to determine what is censored and what isn't. That is not what the Constitution says.
But there is zero redemptive value. There is zero upside to any of this being in the public domain, let alone in the minds and hands and homes of our young people. We need to have honest conversation about what should or should not even be allowed in the United States as it relates to some of the things that are being put in the hands of our young people.
So I'm just gonna choose to gloss over his complete misuse of the term public domain, because this is frustrating enough already. So he is trying to apparently bring back an outdated standard that was literally used in the late 1800s and early 1900s to censor films, which is whether any sort of pornography or violence or anything someone could vaguely find objectionable in the media was somehow providing a redemptive value. Now, the redemptive value standard doesn't make any sense. It has all the problems that censorship usually does. It's subjective. Who's to say whether this art has redemptive value or whether it's just pornography? Why would we want that? Who cares? What difference does any of this make? And remember, he could not show a single piece of evidence that any of this actually has a major cultural impact leading to violence anyway. So he's calling for all this for basically a reason that he totally cannot justify. Who would be the, theoretically, state-appointed people who figure out whether it has redemptive value or not? It's a foolish, vague standard that has been repeatedly struck down in the courts for being unconstitutional. That is not how freedom of speech works. But here, at least, we finally have him, even though he's still a little bit vague about it, proposing something to do about gun violence. And it is the stupidest possible solution. He clearly is advocating banning certain types of media, or at least greatly limiting them. When he talks about how, we need to be having frank conversations about whether there are certain things that should be allowed in America. Really? I mean, that sounds like a pretty anti-American statement to me. Now, this guy may claim to love the First Amendment, but I have seldom, if ever, heard a politician put forth a statement that was more anti-freedom of speech than this. And he can't even give one piece of evidence as to how it would help.